Okay, colleagues, good evening, and I hope that we are live. So today, I am planning to talk about the so-called...
Okay, colleagues.
Okay, excellent, yes. Project of Enlightenment. Project of Enlightenment. Now, immediately, let me maybe apologize in advance. Well, this online format is, I find... highly distracting in many ways. The usual classroom experience, I think, is conducive to your listening, but also helps me collect my thoughts together. So this lecture might turn out slightly more disorganized than I planned, but I'll try my best. I'll try my best. So I guess before we begin, let me just remind myself and you, right, that we are... the name of our course is Philosophy and Methodology of the Natural and the Social Sciences. And the course basically comes in three parts. So we began by talking about naturalism and what naturalism is. And then we proceeded to talk about epistemology, so epistemological foundations of naturalism. And and this was basically, naturalism is mostly deals with philosophy of natural sciences, but also has something to say to social sciences as well. But now we sort of we talk about social sciences proper, and the third part of the course is basically devoted to social theory. And again, notice when we talked about naturalism, we did talk also about naturalistic approaches to society. So basically, the question as to how can we explain society as a natural phenomena. And now, when we talk about social theory, we also need to be on the lookout as sort of basically what is the social theoretical explanation of natural science and science in general. So it's like, if you want, sociology of science, including natural science. So we have, you see, a scientific approach to society and now a sociological approach to science. So if you want, thinking of society as a natural scientific phenomena, or thinking about science, including natural science, as a sociological phenomenon. Both of these have to be kept in mind. So especially this last one that we're more or less in the middle of thinking through is this idea from a sociological perspective of thinking of science as something that human beings do, as a science as a human practice governed by human rules. I don't want to get into this right now, but we mentioned, especially when we discussed Thomas Kuhn, all of these ideas as to how there are sociological factors, institutional factors, irrational factors that determine, what gets published, what theories we choose, etc., etc. And like all of this has been under the heading of the irrationality of theory choice. Irrationality of theory choice. That basically choice between theories is often determined by irrational considerations. Which I should get to the Project of Enlightenment, but let me just say, it's like I've been listening this morning to an interview about a very important result from von Neumann concerning quantum mechanics and the impossibility of the local variables. And it's an interesting thing because von Neumann had a lot of clout, had a lot of and von Neumann was a brilliant physicist. However, his refutation of the alleged refutation of the local variables theories, this is slightly maybe too complicated for our purposes. What I'm driving at is that his result was actually almost immediately disproved. There was a mistake. There was a mistake in his theorem, I guess, but the mistake was pointed out by, I think the name of the scholar is Greta Herrmann, and the problem is that Greta Herrmann was a woman. And this was in 1935. And in 1935, if you know, again, these are sociological factors. Just because she was a woman and he was a great mathematician, his mistake went unnoticed for the next, I think, 30 years. For the next 30 years, people thought that he got it right. And even though Greta Herrmann published a refutation, nobody paid attention to that. Basically, like, nobody basically read her article. And this is a problem, and we should be aware of this in science. And this is, you know, this whole discussion led to the so-called Bell's inequalities and issues that have to do especially with quantum entanglement and issues of non-locality. These issues are completely, absolutely central to our contemporary understanding of quantum physics. And to think that important breakthroughs were delayed by 30 years based on, you know, institutional factors, factors of reputation, and maybe even factors of you know, sexism. Obviously, you know, sexism and discrimination are problematic and controversial points. There's a lot of very heated discussion right now in the public space. But I think, you know, these kinds of examples we should keep in mind. Anyway, apologies. I digress. Let me go back. Let me go back to the Project of Enlightenment. So this is the structure of the course, and we're talking about social theory. We talked about Durkheim last time. And this time, I want to I want to focus on the normative dimension of social theory. So not all social theorists pay attention to the normative dimension. So again, there's this interesting debate. So basically, there's a question: should the theorist be an activist, be engaged, right? Politically engaged. You know, politically engaged. And some people would say yes, especially this would be associated with the Marxist perspective, and we'll talk about Marx next time. So for figures like Marx. But then for figures like Weber, for example, the answer is a resounding no. And I think, you know, both of these opinions have something to them and should be kept in mind for our purposes. So, however, and I want to straddle the fence. I kind of want to have it both ways in this course. But to me, the most important reason to talk about the Enlightenment Project in the context of our course here is this issue of conflict and consensus. And I kept talking about this, you know, over and over and over again. I keep returning back to this issue every class almost, right? This idea, this question of whether society is this, you know, whether, I mean, like in Aristotle's way, in Aristotle's phrase, if you want, does society first and foremost enable us, or is it a conflictual place ultimately, right? So let me get my usual heroes up on the board. So the champions of conflict would be people like Heraclitus, for example, or maybe the ancient Greek sophist Callicles, and the champions of consensus would be well, Aristotle among the ancient philosophers, I think, again, with his notion of man as by nature a political animal, right? And this is talking about ancient times. And in modern times, we will see theorists of conflict, and these would be Marx and Weber. And the theorists of consensus are going to be, well, we'll talk about some of them today. Well, maybe Hegel and Durkheim. There are others, but these are the ones that I suppose come to mind first and foremost. The most important contemporary theorist of consensus, I think, is going to be Jürgen Habermas, and I'll talk about Habermas in a second. Actually, as a matter of fact, I do, unless the quarantine ruins our plans, I think the last lecture of the course should be devoted to Habermas. So let's try to take a step back. You know, let's try to engage in some thinking for a change. You know, break it out the rush of the day and try to engage in a little bit of thinking. And so the way I phrase that is let's ask this about sort of the foundation of social sciences in general. So these would be like how does social theory get going? So let's say the science of society. How do we approach society scientifically? And again, notice, the idea would be that sort of in the beginning of time, in the beginning of human intellectual history, human beings did not really thematize, did not really problematize their relationship to society. People in ancient societies just saw them as embedded in their societies. They had no critical distance, and in an important respect, this kind of question, an important question that the ancient Athenians, for example, began to ask of what is justice? What is justice? Right? These are the kinds of questions that people used to not ask in a simpler time. So you see, like this is we got to understand. Human beings have lived under the rules of justice for thousands of years before they asked for the first time this question: what is justice? Right? So it is a certain development. What is justice? And there are conditions of asking this question. It is an achievement. It is an achievement to ask this question. I suppose the most important, the way I see it, the drive behind scientific understanding of society is to move away from teleological explanations and towards mechanistic explanations. So you begin to do social science. So you get science of society when you move away from how should I phrase this? Like so instead of teleology, okay, anyway, let's just move away from teleological and intentionalistic explanation. Towards structural mechanistic explanations. Or let's say mechanistic and structural explanations. Wow. Okay, intentionalistic. Anyway, so this is what I would say, and basically the science of society begins. I would say, well, there are certain. I mean, you can look at ancient philosophers, maybe Heraclitus, Aristotle. I think definitely has some beginnings of science of society. Like, for example, when he talks about the conflict between rich and poor. So even though Aristotle is supposed to be a champion of the teleological approach, still in Aristotle we have beginnings of the structural explanation. So Aristotle, but then very importantly, there's Giambattista Vico. There's Hobbes, and I want to say at least a word about Hobbes today. There's Montesquieu. And there's Rousseau. Anybody else? Well, I mean, there's a million other names. Obviously, I could have mentioned, but these are the ones. These are the ones that come to mind. I mean, I will talk about Hegel today as well. But sort of Hegel, Marx, yes, Durkheim. These are. Everybody agrees that these are social theorists. I would say I wanna maybe to some extent focus on these guys. Now, so in Aristotle, we have this idea that man is by nature political. So it's like the sophists, like for example Protagoras, is going to say, is going to have this interesting opinion, right? That societies are unnatural. Society is unnatural. And Protagoras is an ancient Greek sophist, and Plato, is Plato writing against Protagoras? Well, maybe, but I think he also, finds Protagorean arguments interesting and valuable, and Plato certainly preserves the arguments of Protagoras. But anyway, again, you have this notion that family is natural, but society is unnatural, and we need to come up with rules of justice in order to stabilize the social bond. And I think, again, I keep referring to William Guthrie. Let me write his name on the board. So on the virtual board, and Guthrie talks about sort of natural justice in small communities. How, you know, sort of in a simpler time, in a more primitive time, justice seems to be natural. So in a small tribe or in a small family, it seems that you can think of justice as something natural. But as society becomes more complex, you run into the free rider problem. So society is unnatural, and in order to avoid the free rider problem, we need to society needs to exercise force and maybe even violence against its members. And Protagoras uses this example. He talks about straightening of warped wood. So it's like, notice the crooked wood, warped wood, кривое дерево, is by nature warped. Кривое дерево по своей природе кривое. So we need to apply force and violence to strengthen it out, to straighten it out. And we have seen something, you know, similar already in Foucault, right? Foucault talks about this. I mean, Foucault, what is his value judgment on this is not clear. Foucault is definitely, at least to some extent, critical of the way that disciplinary power is employed in our society today. But sort of this idea that upbringing is conflictual, this conflictual process. So compared to Foucault's disciplinary power. Yeah. So this would be Protagoras. Now the next point in my story could be. I wonder if this works better. Okay, let me try it like this. So the next, yeah, and again, Guthrie, natural justice in small communities, and then in larger communities, but in large communities, you run into the free rider problem. And it's not clear how to solve the free rider problem. And again, you see, it's like in terms of evolutionary theory that we have been talking about, you can talk about the free riders as selfish mutants. And when I say selfish mutant, I mean this in strictly biological terms. So let me even write the name of Robert Sapolsky, okay? So Sapolsky, right? So selfish mutant, selfish as in the selfish gene of Richard Dawkins, right? Meaning that in this world, basically, which is not providentially guided, but is the abyss of the purposeless chaos of matter, right? In this world, what you get is just by random chance, things decay and things collapse. Order is unnatural. You remember. So again, like this teleological versus mechanistic worldview. In a teleological worldview, on the teleological picture, order is natural. So order is natural. Chaos is a problem to be explained. This is why I think the problem of evil is the biggest problem for the religious worldview, and today, and the mechanistic worldview is going to say, well, it's the reverse. It is the reverse, right? So chaos is natural. Chaos and decay. Chaos, decay, disintegration is natural. Entropy, basically, right? Entropy, increase in entropy is natural, and order is a problem. So anyway, let's go back to this piece. So we begin with Protagoras. And I think in many ways, we can think of Protagoras as maybe the first or one of the first founders of social theory proper. Then Aristotle is going to say that, again, man is by nature a political animal. So man is by nature a political animal. And this means that man is by physis, by nature, a nomos making animal. So nomos meaning convention. So convention making animal. And Aristotelian picture has its merits, but in general, the big problem with Aristotle is teleology. That Aristotle believes that this world is providentially governed, that sort of that everything that exists for a good reason. And Aristotle, for example, would say, well, if there is slavery, it means that slavery plays some kind of functional part. Some kind there must be a function to slavery, and this is a problem. This is a problem. So this is how should they focus? How should I abbreviate this? So teleology is a drawback, is a downside, is a defect of Aristotelian mode of explanation. And so to go back to this picture, so Aristotle sort of in brackets, right? But then the rest of these guys, again, Vico, Hobbes, Montesquieu, and Rousseau, they, well, actually, you know what? I could also add Machiavelli if you want, right? Right? Well, if I'm adding Machiavelli, let's also add Hegel. But again, this idea that for Vico, Machiavelli, and then especially for Hobbes, you have an anti-teleological mode of explanation. You do not assume that there's an order in the universe. You do not assume that everything is in the best, is for the best in this best of all possible worlds. So basically, like in the scientific revolution, we move away from teleology. So mechanicism versus teleology, mechanistic explanation, mechanicism versus teleology. Anyway, and you get people like Vico and Machiavelli who are going to propose non-teleological explanations of society. Machiavelli is the founder of this, you know, if you want to some extent, you know, well, I mean, this is an anachronistic, but he's a forefather, he's an anticipator, a forefather of realpolitik, right? This idea that politics is not guided by morals, by moral considerations, so not morality, but interest. And interest may be understood in mechanistic terms. So, you know, once I've said it, so okay, we call Machiavelli, and of course, especially Hobbes. And I think the real strength of Hobbesian approach, Hobbes, much clearer than these other philosophers, is going to come out and say that nothing is good or evil by itself. So Hobbes has this deep commitment to amoralism, amoral or non-moral justification. And I mean, like in general, Hobbes is going to say that life is but a motion of limbs, and therefore automata, you know, engines that move themselves as, you know, by wheels and springs as does a watch, have artificial life. So there is no interesting difference between a mechanical clock and a human being for Hobbes. Yes. Yeah. So if I may just copy paste this here. Yeah, so in Hobbes, oops. So Hobbes, this idea that the universe is matter in motion and that life is but motion of limbs, the beginning whereof is in some part within, and therefore all automata have an artificial life. So automata would be engines that move themselves by springs and wheels as does a watch. And then he goes on to talk about how within the human being you have the nerves, but the nerves are also like springs sorry, nerves are like strings and heart is like a spring. This again, attempt at the beginning of a mechanistic explanation. And very importantly, this leads to Hobbesian amoralism. And this is a quote I have been giving to you basically every class. Amoralism or non-moralism. Let's write non-moralism, right? That we are moving away from moralistic explanations. Hobbes is going to say that by nature is nothing is good and evil, right? So whatsoever is the object of any man's appetite or desire, that is it which he for his part calls good. and the object of his hate and aversion evil. For these words, good and evil, are only used with relation to the person that uses them, there being nothing simply and absolutely so. So nothing simply is good or evil. It is our desires that make some things good and some things evil. And again, Hobbes is also going to have this mechanistic explanation of desires. That again, desires are mechanistically explained. And this is clearly, again, anticipation of Darwin. So this is a proto-Darwinian mode of analysis. And again, we spent all of our first lectures talking about this in great detail. So we get to this point. And so the question is, okay. So for Hobbes, if we assume this non-moral outlook, how is society possible? How is society possible? And I think this is a very important topic. And to a very large extent, Hobbes represents a breakthrough in social theory, right? So Hobbes asks, how is society possible? How is authority possible? Right? So by authority, I mean, if you want, social order. So how is order or maybe even harmony possible, right? So again, if we assume, that the universe is chaotic, a chaotic universe, how can we have social order? So I think in a deep sort of philosophical sense, this is the question with which Hobbes is wrestling, right? And Hobbesian answer is kind of straightforward. He's going to say, obey or die. That this is a necessity of politics. This is basically like the fundamental nature of politics. That, how should I put this? That law is based on lawlessness. That justice is based on injustice. That social order and harmony is based on force and violence. And this is not bad. This is the only thing this is the only way it can be. This is the only way it can possibly be. Right? Stephen Smith, some of you have seen lectures by Stephen Smith. When he discusses Hobbes, I think he shows a clip from A Few Good Men, right? This, when Jack Nicholson talks about this, you can't handle the truth, right? This idea that there is this deep conflictual element underneath the consensus of society. Yeah. So it's like maybe I can use this slide, right? Yeah. So maybe I can just copy paste this. So it's obey or die. Law is based on lawlessness, and peace is based on violence. And in general, society, in an important sense, is based on fear and coercion. So society is based on fear, violence, force, and coercion. And in a very important respect, Hobbes is a defender of the doctrine that might makes right. Might makes right. That at bottom, and Hobbes is going to say, this is how all societies operate, always and everywhere. This is the universal condition of all societies. And Hobbes is going to continue because he's going to say that, and yeah, okay. Also, let me write this maybe idea in Hobbes, right? That your desires are subjective. Desires are ever changing, right? They are variable, constant, inconstant. Well, anyway, let's say inconstant and subjective, right? ever changing, right? Whereas death is permanent and objective. So even though Hobbes is even though Hobbes is a subjectivist and in general a skeptic, so despite his skepticism, he's going to say, yeah, you can be skeptical all day, you can be skeptical all day, you can be skeptical all day, but at the end of the day, we are all afraid to die. And this is the true basis of society. So fear and danger of violent death is the true basis of society. So again, so for Hobbes, fear and danger of violent death is the true basis of society. And again, you see, we are, in this course, I hope that we are not just listening, we are not just doing something, we're thinking, right? So why do we talk about Hobbes? I have chosen to talk about Hobbes specifically for a reason, because I think that this is an idea that has universal validity, that Hobbes is saying something deeply insightful. Hobbes is saying something deeply insightful, right? So in an important sense, I want to say I agree with the Hobbesian picture. I think that Hobbes is painting a broadly speaking, maybe not in detail, but in general outline, he is painting a realistic view of the social reality. And notice how this idea of fear and danger of violent death, so I myself, I think this is realistic, but in the spirit of open discussion, let me write this as always with a question mark. But notice that it is completely compatible with the Darwinian picture. So it's wonderfully compatible. You know what? Let me even write this. Wonderfully compatible with Darwinian modes of explanation. Again, this notion that desires are inconstant and subjective, but death is permanent and objective. It's like, remember, the name of the evolution game is survival and reproduction, right? And reproduction actually maybe being even more important than survival. And it's like, that's exactly what happens, right? So individuals who don't preserve themselves go extinct. For both Darwin and Hobbes. So Hobbes and Darwin would both say that individuals who don't preserve themselves go extinct. Well, not just individuals, but also societies. Individuals and societies that don't preserve themselves. And when I say preserve, okay, I mean like we're talking about genetic lineages. So preserve themselves or their offspring that don't preserve themselves or offspring go extinct. Yeah. And notice, I think the wonderful, insight of Hobbes's deep realism, is that Hobbes can explain. So Hobbes's realism is that he can both explain slavery in Egypt and modern day liberalism. So let's say Hobbes can explain both. Why slaves in Egypt obeyed. So why slaves in, I say Egypt, but any place, could be ancient Rome or ancient Greece or antebellum American South, whichever you prefer. Why slaves in ancient Egypt obeyed? Because they were afraid to die. They were fear of death. And also Hobbes can explain why, in Liechtenstein all public transportation is free. Why public transport is free in Liechtenstein, right? So you see, like he explains both the condition and the basic condition the basic condition, and the possibility of progress. So let's talk about this in slightly, well, Liechtenstein. I hope this is the right way to Liechtenstein. Yeah, so this is fear of death, and this is, as Hobbes says, the strength of the sovereign is derived from the vigor of the subjects. So the strength of society is derived, so how shall I write this? Social strength is derived, wow, I can't spell this time of day, is based on the vigor of the subject, vigor of the subjects. Based on vigor of individuals, right? Let me maybe do it this way. So the basic precondition, right? So that, like, why people would tolerate even horrible regimes, and also possibility of progress. So if you want tyranny and slavery, but also possibility of progress, I don't know, socialism, liberalism, communism, even communism. This is a strong assertion. As you know, I teach Hobbes in the University of London. That's the basic idea. And yeah. So I suppose I want to continue next, and I want to emphasize that in the major thinkers that I want to discuss today. So in people like Hobbes, but also Rousseau and Hegel, for our purposes. And then later on we'll talk about Marx. Well, Durkheim as well. Why not? So Durkheim, well, Durkheim obviously after Marx. Whoops. Durkheim, and well, we'll talk about Habermas. These thinkers, they're all members of the Enlightenment Project. Of the classical philosophers, let's also add John Stuart Mill. So what is the Enlightenment Project? What is the Enlightenment Project? I would say that the basic idea is this idea of rational politics. Rational politics. That politics can be rational enterprise. The question of politics has a rational solution. The question of politics, well, let me just write rational politics. The possibility of rational politics. Now, let's talk about this some more, right? So I think the idea is simple. And the idea goes something like this. The same way that we hope that after the scientific revolution, we're capable of understanding the laws of society and using the laws of society in order to reshape, scientific revolution, we understand the laws of nature, and we can use the laws of nature to reshape human life for the better. All right. So again, scientific revolution. We can understand the laws of nature. And use the laws of nature. Understand and use the laws of nature to make life better. To make human life objectively better. To improve life. The same way, the Enlightenment Project would say that we can understand and use the laws of society now to improve life. Society or social development. And this again, the idea of rational politics, that political science can be akin to medicine or mathematics. Can be akin to math, but also more importantly to medicine. That we can understand and cure the social ills. And so people like Hobbes, they would say that there is a rational solution to the problem of politics. If you want rational, objective solution to the problem of politics, that will reconcile the interests of the individual and society. So this is crucially important for my purposes. Well, actually, immediately, let me give away the answer. And what this gives us is this idea of autonomy, which is free obedience. Free obedience. And this is why I think I'm going to talk about Rousseau now in a second. Yeah. So Rousseau is widely considered to be the most important political theorist of all times and places. And definitely people like Hobbes and maybe even Machiavelli talk about similar issues before Rousseau. But Rousseau has this very powerful formula. So in the Social Contract, Rousseau writes, man is born free, and everywhere he is in chains. So man is born free, and everywhere he is in chains. Compare this to Protagoras, who talks about the straightening of crooked wood, or Foucault. So we are, as a matter of fact, everywhere in chains. And Rousseau asks, what can make this legitimate? What can make the chains legitimate? This is the true question of politics, says Rousseau. So how can we reconcile, again, obedience and freedom? So how can we reconcile obedience and freedom? So the problem of autonomy, reconcile obedience and freedom. Also reconcile, if you want, order. And so when we say obedience, what we mean is social harmony and social order. Right? This is the key question. It's a normative question, but I think it's important to ask this question, even in a course on philosophy of social sciences, right? So next, writing after Rousseau and influenced by Rousseau, Immanuel Kant, in his very important article, Was ist Aufklärung? What is enlightenment? Defines the essence of enlightenment in this phrase, Latin phrase, sapere aude, which is translated as dare to use your own reason. Again, this idea of autonomy, or I keep talking about autonomy, it's rational autonomy, right? Anyway, let me go back a step from Kant, and let's hang out with Rousseau a bit more. So Rousseau actually has this very bleak picture. I don't think I'm not sure I want to explain this. Those of you who have taken Christer's course last year know a little bit about Rousseau's politics. Again, his idea of how there's this. Well, actually, I mean, maybe let us talk about this a little bit, right? So we begin by talking about this original state of nature, which, roughly speaking, corresponds to the harmony, the natural harmony of hunter-gathering societies. So hunters and gatherers, and we know, especially those of you who have done the readings, right, that hunter-gatherers actually have a pretty nice existence. Their life is good, by and large. It's not bad. It's not chaotic. But then after we transition to agriculture, we run into big problems. So transition to agriculture with a question mark, because this is not exactly, I mean, obviously it's not exactly what Rousseau is talking about. And very characteristically, in a very uncompromising fashion, Rousseau, he uses, at least in some places, this word bourgeois, to refer to what he calls the evil contract. And the evil contract of Rousseau should remind us, so this evil or Hobbesian contract. evil Hobbesian contract. In the sense that people obey because they're forced to obey because of the fear of violent death. So basically, you know, we talk about this free rider problem, and Hobbesian solution, Hobbes' solution is fear that the state, the government, the society should be strong to overpower any attempts at free riding, any attempts at breaking the law. But Rousseau is going to have a different solution. Rousseau talks about this, again, we'll talk about this in a second, changing human nature. Again, this intrinsic value of patriotism. Intrinsic value of patriotism. For those of you who are interested in this for, I don't know, political reasons, this is sometimes known as classical republicanism. I suppose I should say small r republicanism. Classical republican position of Hobbes. Sorry, of Rousseau. Let's go back to the formula. So, but this life in slavery is not worth living, thinks Rousseau. He thinks that human beings tolerate this, that slaves in Egypt tolerated slavery, but honestly, they did not have enough strength to kill themselves. But sort of Rousseau is a very uncompromising philosopher in a sense that, you know, talking about this life not worth living. But then he also talks about this possibility of establishing the true social contract. And this is now what we talk about, this classical republicanism in the true social contract. So this is Rousseau, true social contract. And in these terms, Rousseau is talking about this idea of that he says that the problem to which the social contract is the solution is the following. And again, I remind us, we have talked about this, autonomy. How do we reconcile obedience and freedom? How do we reconcile obedience and freedom? And this is sort of exactly what Rousseau is talking about. Rousseau says that the task of the social contract is to find a form of association that will defend and protect the person and goods of each associate with a full common force. So, like Hobbes, Rousseau agrees that the social contract needs to give us protection. And by means of which, so by means of this association, each, uniting with all, nevertheless obeys only himself and remains as free as before. So is this conflict or consensus? Again, this is very much a consensus side. And well, Rousseau has a conflictual side as well, because, you know, if you look at this stage, we have a natural harmony in the beginning on the stage of the savage. Then we get into this conflictual state of the bourgeois, and then we reconcile the differences in this citizenship. Well, yeah. So again, well, actually, you know what? Let me do something like that. So again, so conflict or consensus. And the idea would be, again, this is a jargon that Marxists use. I think it goes back to Hegel, but I have not been able to conclusively locate these phrases in Hegel. So we start with undifferentiated unity. I talked about this last lecture. Oops. This primitive harmony. And in this primitive harmony, we lack self-consciousness. So lack self-consciousness or individuality. Then we go to the stage of differentiated disunity. And then our final destination is differentiated unity. Again, I think this is a very productive schema, which supposedly comes from Hegel, although don't quote me on that, because I have seen these words in Hegel. Like undifferentiated unity would be ununterschiedene Einheit. But does Hegel use them exactly in this phrase, in this way? Unfortunately, I am not sure. Hegel is complicated. So, differentiated unity, we're talking about primitive harmony. lack of self-interest or individuality. So it is order, but it is simple order, right? So differentiated disunity. Now we acquire awareness. So this is should I write Hobbesian war of all against all? Let me write Hobbesian war of all against all. Hobbesian war of all against all. And we are talking about the development of self-consciousness and individuality, which leads to the flourishing of the free rider problem. So self-consciousness and individuality emerges and leads to the free rider problem. Self-con and individuality emerge and lead to the free rider problem. Give rise to the free rider problem. And then in this differentiated disunity, anyway, yeah, sorry, differentiated unity, finally. Okay, maybe let's do it this way. We talk about well, we are talking about complex harmony, complex organic harmony. And now we talk about how self-consciousness and individuality, self-consciousness and individuality develop in a sophisticated fashion. I don't know, the emergence of sophisticated self-consciousness which can reconcile the interests of the individual and the society. Emergence, evolution of sophisticated self-consciousness, which leads to reconciliation of the interests of society and of the individual. Yeah. And I should probably remind you of the problem of the ring of Gaijins from Plato. Ring of Gaijins, right? Ring of Gaijins is a story from Plato's Republic. It is a ring of invisibility. And the idea for Plato, so for Plato, there's this famous character whose name is Glaucon. So in Plato's Republic, Glaucon says that basically, I don't know, justice is for suckers. Justice is for the weak. But the strong, if they can, should always disregard laws of justice. But the strong do what they can, and the weak suffer what they must. But the strong do what they like. And this would be the idea of a certain vision of human nature, right? Whereas people like Aristotle, so when I say so, it's not really Plato; it's Glaucon in Plato's Republic. So let's say Glaucon in Plato. Justice for weak, the strong do what they like. Yeah. So for Aristotle, and for so many others, so for Socrates, for Plato, for Aristotle, for Rousseau, but also for Mill and for Hegel, you get this idea that that human nature, that humans can only be properly human and properly happy only in a society, or let's say in a well-constituted society. This is the vision of consensus par excellence, right? And this is also associated with ideas of positive freedom. Positive, wow. I cannot spell something. This is strange. Anyway, positive freedom versus negative freedom. Negative freedom is this Hobbesian freedom to do whatever you want. But positive freedom is this, again, positive freedom to express your humanity in a pro-social way. Something like that. Positive freedom. Yeah, this is an important concept for our purposes. And the idea that for these guys, like, you don't need the ring of Gaijins. For Aristotle, Rousseau, like, the ring of Gaijins is more or less useless. The ring of Gaijins is almost entirely useless. Because, like, the ring of Gaijins does not help you develop as a human being. Like, the ring of Gaijins does not help you develop as a human being. Sort of in this pro-social way together with us. And I kept talking about these ideas, I think, in the previous classes. So I hope that this is more or less clear. And this is the notion again that we're moving towards this differentiated unity. And so in terms of Rousseau, this would be so again, savage, bourgeois, citizen. So this would be for Rousseau, savage. This would be bourgeois, and this would be citizen. In Rousseau's term. Something like that. Something like that. And again, notice that the ultimate idea is that in an important respect, again, we become properly human and properly free only in society, so that for Rousseau, he actually uses the French word utilité, utility. He talks about how justice and utility coincide in the true social contract. What right permits is combined with what interest prescribes. And he talks about this difference of interest makes society necessary, but commonality of interest makes society possible. Idea of common interest, and this notion of free obedience. That again, in society, properly speaking, we're autonomous. So this is not our slavish submission to the laws of society, but free and dignified autonomy. And again, some philosophers are going to call this into question. So basically, is the project of enlightenment, is it coherent? Is rational politics possible? Rational politics possible, right? And so Rousseau is going to say yes, but maybe no. And when we talk about yes, again, the most important proponent for our purposes is going to be Jürgen Habermas, and we'll talk about Habermas in a second. But there are, of course, people who say no, and it's kind of hard to say exactly whom, because people always shift their opinions. I think Jacques Derrida is often associated with this idea that rational politics is impossible. Maybe Max Weber. But philosophers change their mind, and they can be read in various ways. So I'm not sure I want to necessarily insert somebody particular on the no side of the equation. And this is basically I think the most important thing I wanted to talk about today. I should maybe also mention how in Hegel expresses this in his own peculiar terms, and Hegel talks about how, again, in this differentiated unity, on the level of differentiated unity, so on the level of differentiated unity, which he calls the Rechtsstaat. I hope I'm spelling this correctly. Rechtsstaat. Yeah, I think this is correct. Which means constitutional state of laws, something like constitutional state of laws. In Russian, you would say правовое государство. And what happens on this level is you have a coincidence of the subjective and the objective. Subjective is equal to the objective. So your subjective inclination your conscience coincides with the objective duty, which is your, I don't know, social utility. And Hegel has this complicated story as to how he thinks, which is broadly speaking similar to Durkheim, the story of how individuals through family, through what he calls civil society, which is broadly speaking the market, through family, through the market, and through the rational bureaucracy. So these three elements, with the help of these three elements, the individual is integrated into society. So they help integrate the individual into society and to establish this harmony. So to establish the harmony between the objective and the subjective. Yeah. So this is the basic idea. This is the basic idea of the Enlightenment Project. Now, let me talk about the problems. So what are the problems? The biggest problem, I think, is capitalism. So for most philosophers whom we're going to talk about, but especially for Hegel and for Marx, but also for Durkheim, and also for Weber, and also for Heidegger, and definitely for Foucault, there's this problem, and the problem is that capitalism has a logic of its own, and Weber is going to call this instrumental rationality. So instrumental rationality of accumulation for the sake of accumulation, for the sake of accumulation, and more importantly, of efficiency for the sake of efficiency, for the sake of efficiency. And the idea is that somehow the logic of the market subverts the proper harmonious organization of society. So it subverts the proper constitutional procedure, it subverts democratic element, organization, political process, constitutional political process. So basically, it is not, so basically it's not people rule, but money rules, at least to some extent. And this is the problem, right? So like in ancient times, the problem was how can we not be ruled by slaves? So again, so somebody like Marx is going to talk about how in feudalism we have this despotism, force, coercion, despotism, which is visible coercion, But under capitalism, we get something different. Under capitalism, we get let's say coercion by people, of people by people, Whereas no. Yes. So whereas under capitalism, what happens is you have coercion by structural market forces. So coercive laws of competition in the market, competition. And so it's not coercion of people by people, but it is coercion of people by impersonal forces. So coercion of people by impersonal forces, impersonal structural logic. And so for Hegel and for Marx and for Durkheim, there's going to be this problem that capitalism has a logic of its own, and capitalism is inherently anti-humanistic. That it is inhuman, right? And so, for example, Durkheim is going to talk about anomy, right? And Marx is going to talk about alienation, right? And Durkheim is also going to talk about this abnormal division of labor. And Hegel, especially, Hegel has a very simple formulation of this, right? I wonder if I can insert a slide. Yeah. So Hegel has a very simple formulation of this. Hegel talks about this, again, German word, which I think is Pöbel. Hegel, well, okay, on extremes of wealth and poverty. And basically, Hegel is going to say that extremes of wealth and poverty subvert the normal constitutional, working of society. He says that the poor don't obey because they don't obey the law. It's not a question of obey. They don't respect the law. You see, it is the bourgeois who obey the law because they're afraid to. But the citizen is supposed to respect the law. We're talking about this dignified autonomy, right? So the poor don't respect the law because they have nothing to gain, because they feel that they have nothing to gain. Again, they feel that society does not take care of them. And the rich don't respect the law because they feel that they can buy their way out of any situation. They can buy their way around, around the law. And you see, again, in many ways, this is a very simple formulation that we're going to see in so many philosophers, right? This idea that capitalism needs to be regulated, that unconstrained capitalism leads to the destruction of society. So unconstrained capitalism undermines society. Also think of the problems like, for example, climate change, pollution, nuclear proliferation. Marxists would say that none of these questions can really be solved until we get beyond capitalism. So unconstrained capitalism undermines society. And again, it's not like market forces are banned. No, market forces are fine, but they need to be controlled and they need to be channeled into a productive vein, in a productive fashion. And yeah, and so who's gonna agree with this? So again, so this is definitely there in Rousseau, and it's there in Hegel very much, and it's definitely there in Marx and in Durkheim and in Weber. And I also think, well, Foucault with a question mark, okay, because Foucault, his positive project is complicated and always with a question mark. And well, I mean, I promised we're going to finish the course with Habermas, and definitely Habermas is here. And in many ways, this seems to me the biggest problem that faces us right now. And so you could say, well, but isn't philosophy of science, isn't it supposed to be about explanation and not prescription? And I began the lecture with this, that some philosophers think that science should only be about explanation and never about value judgments, right? But as a matter of historical fact, as a matter of empirical fact, the vast categories of social scientists actually do worry about these social problems, not just sociological problems, but social problems. And it seems that, again, for the major theorists, capitalism capitalism is to some extent this wonderful thing, and again, Marx is going to talk about this, how capitalism is wonderful and it moves humanity forward and it provides the necessary basis for communism, for example. But at the same time, capitalism is a problem. So capitalism is, capitalism is productive. Capitalism is wonderfully productive. But unconstrained capitalism undermines society. So find a way to keep the balance, right? And so, in the words of many thinkers, the choice is actually simple. This is a controversial point to end the lecture on, but just for fun, let's be a little bit controversial towards the end of the lecture, right? It's a very famous slogan: socialism or barbarism. That's a nice way to end the lecture. I like this. I like the way to end the lecture. Okay, and but immediately, let's go back. In the spirit of the University of London exam, I'm not supposed to tell you my opinion. Again, remember, the only force that a free citizen recognizes is the peculiarly unforced force of the better argument. Actually, a phrase from Jürgen Habermas: der zwanglosen Zwang des besseren Arguments, right? The peculiarly unforced force of the better argument. So, colleagues, I feel that we are very rapidly running out of time. So thank you very much for joining me today. And indeed, I hope that we will continue this discussion and we will continue looking for the better argument, trying to ascertain the relative forces of the arguments, right? For and against. Again, I appreciate your company. I'm definitely looking forward to your questions and comments. I will see many of you in the seminars, and some of you I'll probably see next lecture. And I think our next lecture is going to be on, well, I'm going to have to think about that. It's going to be either on Hegel or on Marx, but thankfully I still have time to decide on that. So anyway, colleagues, once again, thank you so much. And as always, in the spirit of ancient Greek philosophy, hopefully, you have an understanding of this phrase, right? Philosophy should be to the soul what medicine is to the body. And this phrase I like to end every class with. Colleagues, please do take care. Take care. And I'll see you next time.